This is greytFM. greytFM.
Hello and welcome to another episode of greytFM, everyone, the official podcast series from greytHR. I'm Ahalya, and today we're going to take a trip down memory lane, or at least for now. Do you remember when COVID-19 hit and life was changing at a pace so quick we could barely keep up? There was actually another wave impacting people pretty negatively. Any guesses? It was a result of the pandemic, and it began taking shape nearly a month after we were all locked down at home with our families, or even some of us by ourselves. Mass layoffs. Remember that? Millions of people all over the world were faced with the new reality of not having a job. And it happened with the snap of a finger, or actually the snap of a Zoom call. While we were all locked down due to budget constraints and other factors, companies, and more specifically HR and people professionals, had to conduct mass layoffs remotely over a preferred video app. And with an unknown and deadly virus floating around, it was already a surreal time. And add to that, mass layoffs, that just made it an even more uncertain time. Now, working professionals all over feared for their job security, and it was a really difficult time. And having one of these conversations, right, conducting a situation like this can't be easy either. I mean, it isn't easy in person. So what happens when you're left with carrying out or navigating this entire situation over a screen? Let's explore with Ketan Krishna, People Head, RentoMojo, and People Advisor, YourNest Venture Capital. Hi, Ketan. How are you?
Ahalya, hi. I'm doing fantastic. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you for being here, Ketan. And I think your inputs are going to be extremely valuable given your experience in the people profession. We're faced with a new reality now of hybrid work. When it comes to layoffs, it's always a tough time to conduct one of these things. And it's a sensitivity that HR professionals need to be equipped with, right? But doing this online, doing it remotely, I think many factors get thrown into the mix. So let's start the conversation maybe from an experiential point of view. It becomes really hard to communicate nuance and emotion in these situations over a screen, right? So what has been your experience with this kind of situation?
First thing first, independent of the mode, this stage or, these instances in my career is one thing that I've always hated about my job. It is the toughest thing to do. I don't know if it is good or bad, but I got exposed to having these conversations very early in my career. I was still trying to get a hold of what to do, how to do. I'm talking about times when this was completely unheard of, but right. I saw it, I witnessed it. It was very, very challenging. And a question that I actually asked my boss is that why are we supposed to be involved in this part of the job? And he said, we've signed up for it. We are the people champion. We have to ensure that we create a lot of balance and we bring in the empathy. It's never right. From one point when you see it is always going to be painful. But what my bosses used to say, how do we reduce the difficulty and help people navigate through the situation? So that's been my kind of interface to this. As I said, I always hated it. And then of course the world moving from physical to virtual made things more complex. But having said that, I personally believe that face to face is way harder than actually doing it on the screen. Because face to face we have to deal with an individual, understand their emotion, be there. There would be anxiety. There would be, a lot of concern. People would just kind of lose the senses. This is kind of, an accident that apparently happens. So I personally realized that the face-to-face is the harder way. Now, the challenge, the reason I say that is, it is very important that we don't take the easier path.
Right.
There is a requirement of the organization and we have to do it. My only request, or a big request here, is, as much as possible, take the harder route and do not try to use digital or virtual mediums as a way to reduce the pain for yourself.
Right.
Because while it may ease off things for you, it is not going to be easy for the person who is receiving, independent of, if that's in person or in, on the screen. But my only call out is, do not use this as a tool to do it faster, easier, and in a quicker way.
That's an interesting sort of juxtaposition, right? Because on one hand, it makes the job easier for one person, but the very person who needs to be conducting it needs to be sensitive to that and actually often make the harder choice.
Because we are emotional beings, we do not want to go through the turmoil because we know it would be painful. So, digital, while it enables it into doing a lot of things, but it also comes with its own set of challenges. So the question, what I intend to focus on is, how do you, if online is the only option, how do you still ensure that, none of the things that you would essentially do in offline would get compromised?
So, Ketan, just to take from that, every people professional or HR professional is tasked with, conveying the news that is going to drastically change the person's life, right, on the receiving end. But if, like you said, doing it virtually is the only option, what is the one thing you think HR professionals cannot afford to overlook in that situation? The one thing that they have to keep in mind, non-negotiable?
I would say top of the mind, two things which would actually have to work in the combination. One is being authentic.
Right.
Second is, to listen.
Mm-hmm.
The reason it fails and it becomes even more difficult is when it is a one-way download. If we operate as a messenger, I think then I would recommend best to do it on an email. And, if that's the stance that you're taking, don't add this process at all. But if you're actually, one of the reasons to do it again is not to have a tick in the box saying that, I had a conversation with the individual. If you're not listening and if you're not being authentic, this is where, I would recommend or definitely say, everybody should focus on being authentic and listening during the conversation rather than making it a download from top to bottom saying that I'm a messenger. This is what I've heard. Mm-hmm. This is, what you need to know. This is what your package is, blah, 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 and finish off.
Right. And also, in that vein, so these are obviously things that HR professionals should caution themselves against, but are there also any kind of, behaviors or reactions? I think, at the end of the day, HR professionals are still people, right? So even though it's happening virtually, there might be a tendency, for your human instinct to kick in and sort of maybe, I don't know, get defensive or pitch yourself against the person that you're talking to. So are there any kind of reactionary behaviors that you would suggest HR professionals caution themselves against, given the sensitivity of the situation? Because it is a tricky situation, right, when it's happening online.
Yeah, so a few top 4-5 things that comes to me, one is, as I said, listen. First thing is to definitely listen, hear people out.
Right.
Second, respect the point of view that people have.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because everyone is coming from a very different need state, life state, career state. And it is extremely important to listen, because this is not an easy thing for them to go back and talk to anybody instantly. So you have to be that friend. You have to be that person whom they can express. It is important that you allow them to let their emotion be out without being judged. That is the second piece that I will say.
Right.
You always need to have a stand and tell them that, you understand and you empathize with them that this is not easy. And, that feeling has to come. Again, you just can't say, I know how difficult it is. But when you're saying, I can understand how difficult it is, mean it. That's the third one. Mm-hmm. Fourth, be very clear and transparent about the reason and the impact. Okay, this should not be, just don't take the person around and round saying that, this happened, this is why it has happened. Be absolutely clear. Go and ask these questions for the people who are working with this. Be part of it. Mm-hmm. And, understand and have a clarity on why this is happening. And of course, what's the outcome and how will it, shape up? Because that's not a place that you want people to be left with ambiguity.
Yes.
Another important point, do not, and very clearly, kind of, if there is a way to put it in bold here, not make others or the manager or the organization a scapegoat. Hold the ground, right? If you're not convinced, go back, ask a question, understand why you are doing it. The easiest thing that can happen is saying that, yeah, I know, but your manager or, the management, they don't listen and here and there. Just do not take that stance. Then you are going to lose your credibility. Okay. It's a painful conversation, but it should not mean that you're losing the credibility of your HR function, of you as an HR professional or the fraternity. Right? Few of the practices that I've known, and I've seen some of the great managers do it. The best is to get the manager in the conversation.
Yeah.
Okay. They hate it, but I know the great managers, many of them actually volunteer and say, you don't need to do it. Let me do it because it is my people. I'm accountable for them. I'm accountable for where we are today, and I'll take it. And I've had worked with those managers, and trust me, there's nothing that can replace that.
I think it makes it a lot more transparent for sure. And I guess also there's an effort to preserve a relationship that has been built. It's not transactional really, right?
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that, again, additional thing that I would recommend the HR professionals to do is speak to the managers, understand if there is already a situation that the individual may be dealing with. That is going to help you plan the conversation on the timing, on the way, on the mood, and have your conversation built around to ensure that you have done your homework, and maybe you can get some exception or something that can help. We have had cases where some of the people who got impacted in early days of my career, they were going through a difficult time. Somebody was expecting to become a parent. Right. And you suddenly, when a cord like this is cut, the first question comes is, I will be, my source of income is going to get impacted. Can you extend the medical benefits to me? So if you find that, it is going to, help the person manage with the top 2-3 problems that at least you can influence and control.
I think, Ketan, interestingly, also, again, to put the focus back onto what the HR professional can do once they found out that they need to have a conversation like this, right? You just spoke about, approaching the managers, involving them in the conversation in that moment. Are there other alternatives that an HR professional should consider given a case-by-case basis? For example, we've got performance improvement programs, right, in a physical workspace. So virtually, if someone, if the work situation is completely remote, is there something that an HR professional can do, step in and try to, like you said, manage the situation a little differently?
I'll go back to some fundamental here. And, I'm glad that you brought this question. And this is something very, very important for everybody in the HR fraternity to understand. And I'm sure a lot of them know, but just a reminder, perhaps. There is a fundamental difference between layoff and, performance-led exit. Layoff, I'm assuming, is a case when, there is an organizational situation where the ability of the organization to sustain with more people to either give them meaningful career or meaningful job or meaningful salary is something which is fundamentally a challenge. Never link layoff to performance. If that's the case, be very clear that we would, like GE used to have this loud and clear saying that the bottom 5% of people every year would have to exit. Now, personally, I don't favor that, but I'm giving you a reference of a practice that existed. So if it is in a form of a policy, then it becomes easier, but never bring the flavor of performance and layoff together. If it is a performance conversation, I am assuming you would have a process or a policy around it. If not, create one and follow through the process. The principle to be followed in that case continues to be the principle of natural justice, which is where, performance improvement plan is fundamentally saying that, you are not delivering to what is expected, right? And here is a plan. If you don't, move the yardstick up, we don't think so we would be able to continue with this relationship. But a very, very important point, again, something that I learned is, when having a difficult conversation on performance, of course, manager has to be there. Very important, differentiate between performance and performer. Now, what we do, and a mistake that we do is we say, Ketan, you are a poor performer. That is where we take it wrong, because we are kind of, typecasting an individual, saying that you're not good for anything. What we should say is your performance is not meeting what we expect to be delivered. Now,
Right.
the moment we do it, we are separating the individual from the outcome. Very, very important difference. So always keep the focus on the outcome and not on individual, because it hurts. Somebody comes and says, Ketan, you're a pathetic performer, versus saying, Ketan, this year these were the goals, and on these the outcome that you have been able to drive is way lower than the expectation. I would be responding to these feedbacks very differently.
No, that is very important, actually, Ketan. Thank you so much for highlighting that. Because I think, approaching it that way also gives the person whose performance is in question a chance, right, to take that
Absolutely.
feedback constructively, and motivates them as well. And speaking of, that is kind of my next area of focus, which is, say that there has been this conversation, it has happened, but performance has been brought into question, and also the possibility of continuing work with the organization, right? At that point, Ketan, when again it's a remote situation, how can people professionals actually help the people who have been laid off be proactive in their transition period, and how can they accompany them and make sure that the exit is not, again, transactional, is not something that is just done and there is a line drawn in the sand, but something that is it is a transition, right? It happens slowly and correctly, if I may use that word.
So the top of the mind responses that I get is, one, first make a note of all the queries and questions, especially the ones that you don't have a view or an answer on, or the request that they may come up with. Second, get back to them after finding the answers. The answers may still be no, but always, don't close it saying that, this is it, this is how it has to be done. Say, okay, allow me XYZ days or hours. Let me get back and see what best could be done. Third, if you're convinced, go back and fight for an exception. Bend the rules. If you're convinced, bend the rules, because that's where, you are adding value to the entire system. Once you've done that, make sure that you deliver on what you commit. You're representing the organization, you're representing a fraternity, you're representing a function, you're representing yourself. Make sure that what you commit gets delivered. And most importantly, help with your network, outplacement services, do sessions. I know folks, who reached out to people who got impacted and said, I am great at writing resume, or I know a friend who's great at writing resume. Can we help organize a session for you to, participate in that? Help people with resume building, help people with their job search, LinkedIn strategies, interview preparations, right? Even if the organization is not ready for it, nothing should stop you from extending that arm. Or, of course, organizations are maturing and they're getting sensitive, but not everybody would be able to do it. But that should not mean that you cannot, in your individual capacity, make a difference to their lives.
So I think there are many alternatives, right, and many different ways in which we can support that journey as people professionals. So Ketan, this has been extremely valuable in terms of a conversation. I think, like I said in the beginning, your experience or experiences as a people professional has really helped us understand the nuances of a sensitive situation like this, and the balance that needs to be kept in mind. I think to end today's conversation, I will leave the floor open to you to give us some 5 tips, right? Things that you think HR professionals need to keep in mind when it comes to conducting a remote layoff. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Ahalya. So, the 5 steps or the processes or the key ingredients, if I would put, number 1 being prepared. Okay. It's very important that if you are the one who is leading the conversation, understand the reason of why, this entire event is happening. Second, before the conversation, understand as much about the individual as you could be, which could include speaking to the manager, understanding his or her profile, understanding any life events. It is very important so that you are able to build a personal connect in the conversation. You're talking to an individual and not a employee code. This is something that you need to remember. Third, I definitely recommend sending an invite in advance rather than just saying, hey, can you come on a call and giving the bad news? No. The chances are that the grapevine would have already let the message out and there is some anxiety that exists. So don't rush into it. Send an invite. I definitely do not recommend doing it late nights or before any festivals or any live events, or for that matter, right before a weekend also. Okay, it's very important that the person still, it's a part of their day-to-day, life when this conversation happens. Fourth, keep anything between 30 to 45 minutes and do not hesitate to spend or extend it if you think the individual requires the more, right? And when I say send an invite, I'm assuming you would do a video call only and no audio calls and so on and so forth. And at the last, I've shared a lot of, point of views earlier. If you bring it together, I think it boils down to one single thing, that be human in that conversation. We represent a function which is called people or human resources. So bring out that human part there and, be authentic, be respectful, listen to people. The only thing you could do is to reduce the pain. You can't take away the pain, but, the effort is to reduce the pain. So these are the 5 things I would, top of the mind recommend, for anybody who, unfortunately, as I said, I hate this, has to get into a conversation like this.
Fantastic, Ketan. I think many people will echo your sentiment, but also, the humane approach with which you suggest going about this is very important to keep in mind. Thanks once again for joining us on this episode of greytFM. It's been a very fruitful conversation with you today.
Thank you, Ahalya, for having me here. And thank you to listeners. I hope my perspectives could add a different dimension to, your experience. So thank you so much for giving me your time and have a fantastic day.
I'll catch you on the next one, folks. We'll bring you more conversations rooted in the world of HR very soon. But for now, there's a lot of goodness to soak up from today's podcast. So take it all in and I'll catch you on the next one. Stay safe, stay happy. Adios.
This is greytFM.